But there's another deal on the books for the Cubs that I never looked at as a great signing to begin with, but I didn't realize just how truly bad it looks right now, and that's the Dansby Swanson contract.
Okay, iTalk Studios, I've got a reaction for your video about Dansby Swanson. You did back-to-back videos about Cody Bellinger and Dansby Swanson. I'm going to link the full one for Dansby below. I'll also link the one for Cody Bellinger. And listen, Cubs fans, well, I don't love the Dansby Swanson contract. I do think iTalk Studios, who, by the way, I'm subscribed to because I love their content, I think we exaggerated this one. I'm not defending Dansby Swanson, okay? I am just saying that it's not as bad as what he's about to share.
It's similar to the Tigers signing Javi Baez.
No.
From the moment they signed him away from Atlanta, my feeling was just, it's nothing crazy. Sure, it's a good, solid baseball player to add to your team, but probably an overpay. And 2 years into this contract, I'm going to go as far as to say it's an extreme overpay and a really unnecessary move for the Cubs to make. Any team would be perfectly fine with paying Dansby Swanson $10 million, which is the most the Braves ever paid him in a single season, his last before signing with the Cubs.
So this mention of the contract and what the Braves are willing to pay and what any other team is willing to play versus what the Cubs paid, it's just not a fair statement, because $10 million the year before is his arbitration years. And anytime you get paid $10 million in an arbitration year, which is a really handsome salary, you're going to likely at least double that if you're signing a long-term contract. And if we go back to all the contracts that were signed during that time, it was Trey Turner, it was Xander Bogaerts, and it was Carlos Correa. Every single one of them was flirting with $300 million. And then Dansby Swanson comes in at a bargain at $25 million compared to the rest of those guys. And at the end of the day, we're going to look at their WARs. He's a better player overall in the last 2 seasons. Here they are, last 2 seasons. Dansby Swanson leads the way with a 9.2 F4. Trey Turner is next at 8. Carlos Correa at 6.1. And Xander Bogaerts at 6.6. So I'm looking at this and I'm like, yeah, I mean, if you told me in the first 2 seasons that Dansby Swanson was going to have the highest F4 of any of these 3 players and he was going to come at the cheapest number, sign me up.
Swanson's contract is for over $25 million a year over 7 years, and he's the highest paid Cub. That's a good chunk of money and a long commitment. Forget the time he's since played in Chicago. Was what Swanson did in the 6 years he played in Atlanta worth giving him that contract? No. If you're going to give anybody that much money over that many years, you got to expect them to hit pretty damn well. Maybe not MVP level, but all-star level for sure. Maybe top 10 in MVP votes. Something along those lines.
Okay, so was top 12 in MVP votes not good enough for you? Because that's what we just said. If we look at his F4 in the 6 years, let's just assume for a second his first year, his actual rookie year, it wasn't good, right? The only year he was a negative F4 player. And then 18, he was fine. He was 1.7. 2019, 1.9. 2020, in 60 games, he was a 2.1 player. He found something in 2020 there, and it was a short span, and so you can't really take that into serious consideration. But then he goes back out there the next 2 years and surpasses what he did in 2020, to where he was essentially a stud in 2022. So again, you're making all these statements without actually doing the fact checking. And it's disappointing because I like your channel and I like the videos that you put together. This one, I just think you kind of slapped together based on some feelings. And it's unfortunate because it's not a credible video because of these reasons.
There's just one slight issue. Dansby Swanson was never a very good hitter. He wasn't awful, and he did improve in his later years with the Braves, but he was never that valuable offensively. He was always strictly a defensive shortstop, which is important and fine to have if you don't have him on a big contract and when you have a ton of heavy hitters around him like the Braves did for years.
Okay, now this I agree with you, because yes, he was not a hitter. He had a really good season his last year as a Brave, which is why you see that 6.6 F4, and it was his best offensive year by far, and he was trending up. So was there reason to believe that maybe he would continue to trend up? Sure, but Jed Hoyer said when he signed Dansby Swanson that this is a guy that we believe in year 1 and year 7 is the most likely of the options out there to continue to be a shortstop. And for a team that has a need for some leadership as well, especially on the infield with all the prospects that are coming up, you need a guy like Dansby Swanson who can bring some guys in. Think about this for a second. When Matt Shaw comes up, when James Triantos comes up, when Cam Smith comes up, who they're going to rely on to help ease them into their roles. That's Dansby Swanson. Yeah, it's going to be the infield coaches. It's going to be the coaches as well. It's going to be their AAA coaches. But Dansby Swanson can be that guy to come in and be like, hey, here's how you do this at the major league level. That's where I'm defending Jed on this one, because I think that that's where his mind was at. But also from just a pure athletic standpoint, he's going to be a shortstop likely for all 7 years.
He did have an above average season offensively in his first year with the Cubs. Nothing crazy, but solid, especially when you put it with his great defense. But again, overall as a player, when you factor in his underwhelming bat, he's nothing that special, so it's already not a great deal. And then he has a 2024 season even worse. In a year where offense was down throughout the entire league, Swanson was even worse than the league average.
We keep hearing you talk about the offense. And once again, to me, it's just kind of a moot point, because when you have a offensive player who is league average with a top, let's be honest, he's a top 5 defender in the game, not at shortstop, in the game. He was robbed of his 3rd Gold Glove this year because of this Gold Glove with Rawlings just becoming an absolute joke of an award. When you give it to a guy and Mason Wynn who made 18 errors at shortstop and don't even allow Francisco Lindor to be a finalist, something isn't adding up over there. So one of the things that he's not taking into consideration is that Dansby Swanson had a knee injury in basically the beginning of May that put him on the IL for a little bit of time. And then when he came back, it just felt a little bit rushed. And so going back to when that knee injury happened, it was basically over a 62-game stretch that he actually played on that knee. And he was only batting .218, a .625 OPS, only had 5 home runs. But then he came back, and in his final 52 games of the season, .282 batting average, .822 OPS, 7 home runs. He found that stroke, and he was one of the better hitters for the Cubs. So we've gone through these moments where Dansby Swanson is, you could say, a streaky hitter, but in 23, he also had that foot injury. And so there have been some injuries that have probably impacted him at the plate that we don't really know what a full, truly healthy season looks like from Dansby Swanson quite yet. Yet he still leads all these shortstops that were signed in 2020, going into the 2023 season in F4. That's valuable.
Look at Swanson's old teammate, who also left the Braves, in Freddie Freeman. He's on a 6-year, $162 million contract with the Dodgers. He's making slightly more annually, but less overall, and none of that seems right.
Again, he's going off of feeling, and he's going off of offense. Freddie Freeman is not a defensive gem like Dansby Swanson is. He brings a different set of skills. Just because they were teammates doesn't mean that they're comps. If you look at Freddie Freeman's F4, his highest F4 was a 6.4 with the Braves in 2016. And then after that, he was pretty much a mid-4s and had a 4.7 his last year with the Braves. Dansby Swanson had a higher F4 in one season than Freddie Freeman. Dansby Swanson is younger, as he mentioned. Dansby Swanson brings different sets of skills. And Freddie Freeman, after he signed that contract, went on to have his 2 best seasons in 22 and 23 with the Dodgers, were at a 6.8 and a 7.8 F4. So the Dodgers got him at a time when they said, yeah, this guy has been a really consistent, solid player, and then he took it to the next level with the Dodgers. Dansby Swanson, you're getting pretty much exactly what you paid for. The only difference is in 2022, he had an offensive season that you hoped he could duplicate, but based on track record, you didn't expect it.
I'd say a good example of what Dansby Swanson should be, or at least closer to what he should be considering the money he makes and the contract, is Carlos Correa. Now, Correa couldn't stay healthy last year. That's his problem, and I hope he's healthy next year because he's fun as hell to watch. But going off what he did when he was healthy, great offense and defense. That's what he did, and those numbers are worth what he's making, which is somewhat similar to Swanson. Correa's making more money over less years, but with the contract Swanson's on, I'd say Swanson doesn't have to have necessarily as strong of a bat as Correa's, but maybe a tier below. But in reality, he's like 2 or 3 tiers below.
From an AAV standpoint, average annual value, it's not a similar contract. Correa's at 33, pushing 34. Dansby's at 25, just a tick over 25 per year. That's a significant difference. And might I add that Carlos Correa was supposed to get the biggest money of all and didn't. He got reduced by a pretty sizable amount from a years and money standpoint because of his physical. And so when you look at his F4 numbers and his WRC plus, this guy is going to be a top level hitter, and he's going to put up very similar F4 numbers as Dansby Swanson. He just did it over more seasons. So while Dansby had a really rough first half of his career, Carlos Correa came in as one of the most highly touted prospects. You expected him to be a top-level player. And then, call it 2021, 2022, right around there, 2020, Dansby and Carlos Correa are similar players from an F4 standpoint. Carlos Correa does it with the bat. Dansby does it with the glove. And to Jed's credibility, Carlos Correa was a legit fielder for a long part of his career, but in 2022, he had a really bad fielding year. He was one of the lowest in fielding run value according to Baseball Savant in 2022, right before he signed this longer contract. So Jed looks at that and says, who's going to be likely to be a shortstop for the longest for this type of contract? And he looks at Carlos Correa and he saw a major dip in 1 year and says, that's not the guy. And he's going to want 30-plus AAV, and we can't project that to be a guy that's going to be at the lead of a infield for a long time. Meanwhile, Dansby Swanson continued to stay very level with all the things he was doing from a fielding standpoint, including winning his first Gold Glove. Listen, at the end of the day, this is not a Jason Hayward contract. This is not a contract that right now as Cubs fans we regret. There's been moments, right? I would say for the first half of 2024, we're all like, oh gosh, did we just sign another Jason Hayward contract? But now it's also not a Shota Imanaga contract, right? And Shota needs a few more years to prove that that's an amazing contract. But in year one, that's a freaking bargain. It's a steal. And so all I'm saying is don't compare a guy to one of the worst contracts in the league. Don't compare him to Javi Baez. I know you said that Javi's is much worse, but you used the words it's similar to Javi Baez. And you also said that it's a comp to Carlos Correa. And it's not. It's not a comp because they bring in different sets of values. And for that reason, when you look at it, spending money on all these guys, the Cubs came out as the winners on, at least here in year two, these 4 contracts with these shortstops. And I think that deserves some love. I think you got to look at Xander Bogaerts and say, how good was that contract? How many years? $280 million? Dude's going to be 40 years old or something like that. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but all I do know is that as soon as it was signed, was a bad contract. You look at the numbers leading up to that year, he had one of his worst offensive seasons, and the body type and the athleticism is not that of a shortstop, but they paid him crazy money. They're going to regret that. They should already regret that contract, but they're going to regret it even more. Do a video on that one, iTalk Studios. That's all I got to say.